of course, you guys know my name is Laura Childers, and I love this work. The more that I do this work, the more that I learn what other ways that it can be helpful. Like I'm working with a therapist right now, and another therapist outside of me, and they're working. She's doing couples work, and I'm doing the brain-based work and some individual work. And it's really cool because when we redo the EEG, sometimes I can provide a truth that they had a visceral sense of. So let's go ahead and get started on the presentation here.
Right.
And so the goal really of these presentations, or the vision, is to provide information and interventions that you can understand and really apply in your own work with sex addiction and partner betrayal trauma. So that's really what I'm hoping for, that we're achieving. And the purpose of the presentation is to better understand how ADHD and addiction affect people, and to figure out why some treatments don't work well for them, find new ways to help them heal and recover. So ADHD and addictions, I'm going to brain and medical implications. My goal on my part of the presentation is to look at a few brain signatures related to both ADD and addiction, and one is called beta spindling, and then the anterior cingulate. 100% of my addictive clients have a dysregulation in the anterior cingulate. Some of them that are more treatment resistant have it in both the anterior and posterior cingulate. And the cingulate is kind of how we focus our attention. It has both a thought part to it as well as an emotional part to it. And the anterior cingulate is what would help them to find things to satisfy their addiction. So brain signatures related to addiction. What happens when we add PTSD into the mix, and then medical complications that can cause issues with attention and possibly lead to addiction. And so let's look at brain signatures related to both ADHD and addiction. I want to talk about beta spindling. I see that typically in the frontal lobe. It's like a buzz that goes through that frontal lobe. It's an over-arousal. So many have some type of vigilance regulation issue or sleep disorder. They may need to look into some type of supplementation that will allow them to get better quality sleep, to calm their nervous system. They live in their sympathetic nervous system. So a vagal stimulator can be of some relief. It depends. Sometimes it's not helpful, but sometimes it can be helpful. Neurofeedback, neuromodulation, these types of things, anything that's going to help this client switch over from that sympathetic to the parasympathetic. But you have to remember that they have this brain signature that's pervasive. And so if they are not doing really good self-care, it's very likely that they're going to run into some struggles in healing. And so this is the client that you have to make sure that they are doing their self-care. And if you notice that they're starting to slip a little bit, then you need to ask them about their self-care, because they've probably slipped in their self-care. So they may have other over-arousal indicators. The other indicators, oftentimes they're highly intelligent. I see a lot that are very highly intelligent that, like I said, they're CEOs, they can they can hyper-focus, and they're great at hyper-focusing, not at the details. They'll have like a secretary to do the details, right? But their brain runs fast. When you're highly intelligent, especially if you're in the realm of gifted, then your brain runs faster, which leads to over-arousal. And you also tend to have sensory processing or sensory integration issues. So you get overwhelmed easily. And so sometimes they work to prevent that overwhelm. They may have a visual or auditory hypersensitivity due to PTSD, and that's what I was talking about earlier in the visual stream. And so let's say they're highly intelligent, right? So their brain's running really fast. They have beta spindle, so that's an over-arousal. They can't focus, they can't sit still, and they have PTSD. So they're struggling to understand their emotions, and their visual stream is hyper-vigilant. right? And so they're going to get triggered more easily. They may startle with noises, things like that. They're not going to understand their emotions. And so that hypervigilance in that visual stream and sometimes in the auditory stream is an overarousal also. The neurons are firing too fast and they're overaroused. So, so I see many clients that have all three of these, right? They're intelligent, they have a sleep issue, they have PTSD. That the next one is insomnia, by the way. Let me go through all of them. Insomnia. So their brain runs fast. And so over the sensory motor strip, the brain will create faster brain waves in order to, so when they start to like fade during the day, the brain will put in those fast brain waves to re-alert them. So it's a alerting mechanism because our brain is amazing and it will create things to compensate for things that we're struggling with. That's an overarousal because, again, it's a fast wave that the brain has put into place. With PTSD, if if a client had, some type of trauma where they were physically somehow in danger or the perception that they were physically in danger, then the brain can create fast waves over the sensory motor strip. Again, this is another form of overarousal, creates those fast waves over the sensory motor strip so that auditory, visual, and touch, you can be hypervigilant. So you are hearing, perhaps, and sometimes I see this in people who have been sexually abused, right? They are really scanning for noises, someone walking down the hallway, right? They're scanning for what they see. Okay, is this person okay today or not okay today, right? And so the brain, again, as a protective mechanism, creates really fast waves over that sensory motor strip. And that's another form of overarousal. And that is the last one. And that one I think of more as like walking on eggshells, when you have to walk on eggshells, say as a child or even an adult. And so PTSD and addiction. PTSD exacerbates the beta spindling type of addiction. It exacerbates the overarousal. And so that's why a lot of clients who have addictions and have PTSD end up struggling with staying sober because they have this overarousal in them that is the PTSD. That would be a treatment-resistant client right there. Okay, and remember the beta spindling is a genetic. So let's look at ADHD, addiction, and the body. So let's look at, in terms of ADHD, there are a lot of things that can cause struggles with attention. In a lot of the kids that I've worked with, a gluten or dairy allergy, if they eat cake, then they can't pay attention. And so what I mean by that is, and I'm going to go back to my children because, this is where it's just developing, right? So I'm going to go back to that developmental stage. In children, what we can find is sometimes their jaw is maybe too small or it's misaligned. And when they get further into adulthood, if it's not intervened with, it will create TMJ. As a child, what happens is that jaw can be too small and then it restricts the airway. And depending on how much it restricts the airway, that is going to create sleep apnea in that child. And their their sympathetic nervous system is going to be heightened because their body is communicating, you're not getting enough air, right? So they're always in the sympathetic state. Environmental stressors, black mold, is going to create cognitive struggles. Other toxins can create they all create inflammation in the brain. And so you're not going to be able to pay attention. And if it's bad enough, you may not even be able to cognitively process. So I've seen this in some of my older population, actually, here in Houston. This is not an unusual thing. And so I've seen it in some of my older population, and they actually don't have cognitive decline. They are actually, and I can see the difference in the EEG, they actually have mold toxicity in their home, and so they have mold toxicity in their body also. Of course, genetic predispositions, like beta spindling, family environment, parenting styles, stress and trauma. If there's a lot of, say, toxicity in a family growing up, then that's going to create that visual hypervigilance that I've mentioned. Anytime you have that visual hypervigilance, your brain is basically your amygdala is intercepting. It's intercepting visually, it's intercepting auditorily, and so you're going to struggle to pay attention with that. And so that's these kids that don't feel safe, they can't pay attention. Metabolic disorders, thyroid conditions, neurological conditions, and then comorbid conditions such as depression and anxiety are also going to do the same thing, to create issues with attention. So the power of a comprehensive approach. By recognizing the multifaceted nature of attention regulation, we open doors to more holistic healing approaches. So clients, we have teams here in my office that can help people with their diet, can help people with, how to regulate so that they can sleep better, addressing underlying physical conditions like the jaw. Considering environmental factors. We do a lot of lab testing here because anybody who has been highly traumatized or has, had a lifelong addiction or that type of thing, because their body has been in sympathetic overarousal for way too long. If they're in their 40s or above, typically I would recommend doing some lab testing to kind of see, like, some micronutrient testing, and then there's other lab testing, just to see where their body, sometimes it doesn't show up on just regular labs. If they go to their doctor and get regular labs, sometimes you have to do other labs, but typically they are lacking somewhere, and that somewhere is compromising for them. And maladaptive coping strategies for overarousal. The maladaptive coping strategies are multiple addictions, switching addictions, going to alcohol, going to a food addiction or a binging disorder, workaholism, exercise, any of that can become maladaptive, as we all know. And this is basically just switching addictions or playing whack-a-mole with your client, right?